Most home gardens don't fail because there isn't enough water. They fail because the water never reaches the place that matters. You can stand there with a hose watching the ground darken, feeling like the job is done, but much of that water is already gone. Sun pulls it back into the air. Wind drags it sideways. Gravity carries it away from the root zone before plants can use it. Sprinklers make this worse. They spray water high and wide, soaking leaves paths and bare soil. The roots are last in line. By the time moisture reaches them, a large share has already evaporated or run off. What looks like generous watering is often shallow and inefficient. This isn't just about wasted water, it's about stressed plants. When water stays near the surface, roots stay near the surface. Shallow roots heat up, faster dry out quicker, and struggle the moment you miss a day. The plant becomes dependent on constant attention instead of building resilience underground. For many gardeners, watering turns into a daily obligation. Skip a day and the soil crusts over. Skip two and leaves droop. The work never ends and the results still feel fragile. You add more water, but the garden doesn't become stronger. It becomes more demanding. The mistake is treating water as something to spread instead of something to place. Plants don't need wet air or shiny leaves. They need steady moisture where roots actually live. Once you understand that, the question changes. Not how much water should I use, but why isn't the water staying where plants can reach it? That question leads underground. Soil is not passive. When it dries, it doesn't just sit there waiting for water to fall on it. It pulls. This pull is not something you can see, but it is strong and constant. Dry soil creates suction. The drier it becomes, the harder it tries to draw moisture from anywhere nearby. That pull is what moves water underground, not gravity alone. Most gardeners never work with this force. They fight it. Surface watering floods the top layer, then walks away. As soon as the sun comes out, that same suction reverses direction. Water is pulled back up and lost to heat and air before roots can benefit. Different soils behave differently, but the rule is the same. Sandy soil pulls fast and lets go fast. Clay pulls slowly but holds tighter. Loam sits in between. None of them work well when water is only applied from above. Roots respond to this pull too. They don't grow randomly. They grow toward consistent moisture. When water comes in short bursts from the surface, roots chase it upward. When moisture stays deeper and steady, roots follow it down and spread out. This is why timing schedules don't solve watering problems. Watering every morning or every evening doesn't change how soil behaves. It only changes when evaporation starts. The real issue is contact. Water has to stay close enough long enough for the soil to hold it and for roots to reach it. When moisture is placed directly into dry soil, the soil does the work. It pulls water sideways and downward, slow and controlled. When moisture is sprayed on top, the soil barely gets a chance. Once you stop treating soil like a sponge you dump water on and start treating it like a system that actively moves, water irrigation looks very different. That's where buried systems come in. A buried clay pot doesn't work because it's old. It works because of how unglazed clay behaves in soil. Unglazed clay is porous, not with holes you can see, but with thousands of microscopic pathways formed during low-temperature firing. When the pot is filled with water and buried, those pores become a boundary between wet inside and dry outside. Here's the key point. Water does not leak out on its own. It only moves when the surrounding soil pulls it. As long as the soil around the pot is moist, nothing happens. The water stays inside. The moment the soil dries and suction increases, water begins to move through the clay wall, slowly, evenly, only as fast as the soil demands it. There is no steady flow, no drip rate to set, no risk of flooding. The pot doesn't decide when to water, the soil does. This is what separates diffusion from leakage. A crack or hole dumps water until the pot is empty. Clay releases water molecule by molecule, responding to pressure differences, not gravity. When balance is restored, the flow stops on its own. That's why you can fill a buried pot and walk away. It won't drown plants, it won't keep seeping during rain. It waits. In effect, the clay wall becomes a living boundary. It listens to the soil outside and responds only when there is need. No timers, no sensors, no adjustment. This is not automation in the modern sense, it's regulation built into the material itself. Once water enters the soil this way, it stays underground, protected from sun and wind. The surface remains mostly dry, and roots learn exactly where reliable moisture lives. That changes everything about how plants grow. HTTPS Labs Google FXVI Tools Flow Project Chennai 8BS Series 5C9B1 4467B for F9 1 pen tone 3 1 D5 dB. Most gardeners see dry soil and assume something is wrong. In reality, dry soil on the surface is often a sign that things are working. Weeds depend on moisture near the top few inches of soil. That's where most weed seeds sit. When you water from above, you create perfect conditions for them to sprout. Warm, wet, exposed soil is an open invitation. Within days, you're pulling plants you never wanted. A buried clay pot doesn't feed that layer. Because water is released below the surface, the top stays mostly dry. Weed seeds remain dormant. Fewer germinate, and the ones that do are weaker. Over time, the pressure drops noticeably. Beds that once needed constant attention calm down. Dry soil on top also means less evaporation. Sun can't steal what it can't reach. Wind can't carry away water that never surfaces. Every refill lasts longer, especially during hot stretches. There's another effect people don't expect. Soil structure improves. When you constantly wet and dry the surface, it crusts and compacts. Raindrops and hose spray break aggregates apart. Dry surfaces protected from disturbance hold their shape better. This changes how the bed behaves after rain. Water soaks in instead of running off. Foot traffic causes less damage. The soil becomes easier to work, not harder. Labor drops too. You spend less time weeding, less time watering, less time fixing problems created by excess moisture in the wrong place. This isn't neglect. It's moisture where it matters and restraint where it doesn't. A calm surface usually means a healthy system underneath. Sprinklers and drip lines weren't designed for backyard beds. They were designed for scale. On large farms, water systems are built to cover distance, not precision. They move water fast across open ground with the assumption that excess is acceptable. Some waste is expected. Machinery can work around it. Labor is reduced and the system pays for itself through volume. That logic breaks down in a small garden. In a bed measured in feet, not acres, overspray matters. Every missed inch is water paid for and lost. Drip lines promise control, but they come with their own problems. Emitters clog, lines shift, pressure varies from one end to the other. A small failure can leave one plant soaked and another dry. Maintenance becomes part of the routine. Filters need cleaning. Lines crack in the sun. Plastic stiffens, then splits. Every season adds more parts and more replacements. Over time, the system asks for attention almost as often as hand watering did. There's also the issue of placement. Drip systems water in fixed points. Roots don't always line up with emitters. Soil texture changes flow direction. What looks even on paper becomes uneven underground. For many home growers, modern irrigation feels like progress at first. Then it becomes another thing to manage, another system layered on top of soil that already knows how to move water if you let it. Small gardens don't need speed, they need accuracy. That's where low-tech, soil-driven methods quietly outperform equipment built for machines, not roots. Buried clay pots didn't disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared because the world around them changed. As agriculture scaled up, fields got larger and tools got heavier. Plows went deeper, tractors moved faster. Systems that relied on fragile buried objects no longer fit the workflow. A single pass with modern equipment could shatter dozens of pots. What worked well in small plots became a liability in mechanized fields. Plastic solved that problem. Hoses and drip lines could be rolled out, picked up, replaced, and adjusted without touching the soil itself. They were flexible, cheap, and compatible with machines. Efficiency shifted from water use to labor and speed. Home gardens followed the same path, not because it made sense for soil, but because those were the tools available. What worked on farms was sold to homeowners. Convenience took priority over precision. There was also a cultural shift. Gardening became less about food security and more about appearance. Lawns replaced beds. Green surfaces mattered more than root health. Systems that kept soil dry on top didn't fit the image. Clay pots require patience. They ask you to bury something and trust it. They don't look modern. They don't advertise themselves while working. In a world moving toward visible solutions and quick feedback, they were easy to overlook. But being overlooked doesn't mean being obsolete. Small-scale growing still rewards methods that respect soil behavior. When the goal is reliability instead of speed, older tools often fit better than newer ones. The method didn't fail. It was simply pushed aside by systems designed for different priorities. Claims don't matter much in the garden. What matters is what holds up when you measure it. When buried clay pots are tested side by side with surface watering, the results are consistent but not magical. Water use drops sharply, often by more than half, sometimes closer to 2/3. Yields usually stay the same. In some cases, they improve slightly. The real difference is stability. Soil near the pot stays in a narrow moisture range, not soaked, not dry, just usable. Sensors show that this zone changes slowly even in heat. Surface-watered beds swing hard. Wet one day, dry the next. Plants spend energy adapting instead of growing. This doesn't mean every garden sees identical results. Soil type matters. Crop choice matters. Weather matters. In sandy soil, the wet zone spreads wider but drains faster. In heavier soil, it stays tighter and lasts longer. Shallow-rooted crops respond quickly. Deep-rooted ones take longer to adjust. What testing makes clear is this: the savings don't come from restriction. They come from placement. Water goes where roots are active and stays there. Nothing is sprayed, nothing is lost upward, and nothing is given without demand. It's also clear what clay pots don't do. They don't increase yields beyond what soil fertility allows. They don't fix poor soil. They don't replace mulch or organic matter. They simply remove one major source of waste. Used correctly, they turn watering into a background task instead of a daily concern. That's not hype. That's what the data lines up with what experienced growers already see. The system works because it matches how soil and roots already behave, not because it forces them into something new. Most failures with clay pot irrigation start before anything is buried. Not all clay pots work the same. What matters is porosity, not appearance. The pot has to be unglazed and low-fired. If the surface feels slick or dense, water won't move through it properly. Many pots sold as terracotta are fired too hot or treated to resist moisture. Those are storage containers, not irrigation tools. A simple test helps. Fill the pot with water and leave it sitting empty on dry ground. If the outside darkens evenly over time, the clay is porous enough. If it stays dry, it won't work underground either. Size matters too. A pot that's too small empties quickly and needs constant refilling. A pot that's too large spreads water beyond the active root zone. For most vegetables, a medium pot supports a circle roughly 2 to 3 feet across, depending on soil. Handmade pots often outperform factory ones. They're usually fired lower and have more variation in the clay body. That variation creates better diffusion. Uniform, mass-produced pots can be hit or miss. The drainage hole needs to be sealed. If water escapes from the bottom, the system stops regulating. Water will drain until empty, leaving the soil wet once and dry afterward. A clay plug cork or waterproof putty works. The goal is slow release through the walls only. This isn't complicated, but it is precise. The material is the mechanism. If the clay is wrong, nothing else matters. Get the pot right, and the rest of the system has a chance to work as intended. How the pot is buried matters as much as the pot itself. The goal is to place water where active roots will reach it without disturbing the soil structure around it. Dig a hole just large enough for the pot. Don't loosen the surrounding soil more than necessary. Loose backfill collapses later and disrupts water movement. Set the pot so the rim sits just above the soil line. This keeps surface runoff and debris from falling in. The body of the pot should be fully surrounded by firm soil. Press the soil back in gently but completely. Air gaps break the connection between clay and earth and slow water transfer. Once in place, fill the pot with water and cover the opening. A flat stone clay saucer or sturdy piece of wood works. The cover reduces evaporation and keeps insects out. Planting distance matters. Most crops do best when planted in a ring around the pot, about 12 to 18 inches away. This gives roots space to grow toward moisture without crowding the clay wall immediately. In sandy soil, spacing can be slightly wider. In heavy clay, slightly closer. The soil tells you over time. If plants nearest the pot grow much faster than the rest, spacing was too wide. If growth is uniform, you got it right. This isn't a set and forget installation. It's a one-time setup followed by observation. Once the soil settles and roots adjust, the system becomes stable. Good installation disappears. Bad installation creates problems you'll keep chasing. Take the time to place it correctly. Once the pot is in the ground, the job changes. You stop watering on a timer and start paying attention. The water level inside the pot tells you more than any calendar. If it drops steadily over several days, roots are active and soil demand is real. If it stays full after a refill, the soil is already moist or the plants haven't reached the zone yet. Most gardens settle into a rhythm. In moderate weather, refilling once a week is common. In heat, it might be every 3 or 4 days. There's no rule that fits every bed, and that's the point. The system adjusts without you forcing it. Fast emptying doesn't always mean failure. It can mean the pot is undersized for the crop or that young plants are establishing roots quickly. Slow emptying doesn't mean something is wrong either. It often means the soil is holding moisture well, or rain has done part of the work. What matters is consistency, not speed. Rain changes things too. After a good soak, the pot may stop releasing water altogether. That's normal. Don't top it off just because you usually do. Let the soil use what it has. Refill only when the level drops again. Over time, you stop checking daily. The system becomes predictable. You learn how your soil behaves, how heat affects demand, and how different crops drink. This kind of observation replaces guesswork. You're no longer trying to keep up with the garden. You're letting the garden tell you what it needs. This method isn't universal. There are places where buried clay pots struggle, and it's better to know that up front. In very heavy clay soils, water moves slowly in every direction. The pot still releases moisture, but the wet zone stays tight. Roots can crowd the pot, and growth becomes uneven. In these soils, wider spacing or smaller pots help, but sometimes a shallow basin or subsurface drip works better. Large perennial plants are another limit. Trees and shrubs develop woody roots that expand over time. Those roots can crack a pot or seal off its surface. Clay pots are best for annual crops, herbs, and smaller perennials with fine root systems. Cold climates matter too. In regions with hard freezes, buried pots can split when water expands. The solution is simple but important. Drain and remove them before winter. This adds a seasonal step, but it prevents breakage. Containers are a mixed case. Clay pots work well in large containers if there's enough soil mass to buffer moisture. In small pots, the system drains too quickly and loses its advantage. In those cases, controlled hand watering or wick systems perform better. The point isn't to force one method everywhere, it's to match the tool to the conditions. Clay pots excel where soil can move water laterally and where roots stay flexible. Knowing when not to use them is part of using them well. Independence doesn't come from loyalty to a technique. It comes from choosing what fits the ground you're working with. The first season with buried clay pots feels mostly like convenience. Less watering, fewer weeds, more consistency. The deeper changes take longer because the soil isn't being soaked and dried over and over at the surface. Structure starts to stabilize. Aggregates hold together. Fine particles stop sealing the top layer. Air and water move through the soil more evenly instead of in bursts. Microbial activity follows that stability. Bacteria and fungi don't get shocked by sudden flooding or long dry spells. They stay active longer, which means nutrients are cycled more steadily. Plants don't just get water, they get access to what's already in the soil. Compaction decreases too. When soil isn't constantly collapsing after heavy surface watering, it resists foot traffic better. Beds stay workable. You don't fight mud in spring or concrete in summer as often. Roots contribute to this change. Dense root zones around the pot create channels when roots die back. Those channels become pathways for air water and future roots. Over time, the soil becomes easier to manage, not harder. None of this shows up in a single harvest. It shows up in how the bed behaves year after year. Fewer corrections, fewer emergencies, more margin for mistakes. This is what soil improvement actually looks like: quiet, gradual, and cumulative. Watering methods don't just keep plants alive, they shape the soil those plants depend on. Most modern garden systems depend on things staying normal. Water pressure, replacement parts, power, timing. When any of those break down, the system stops working. Hoses split, timers fail, drip lines clog. The garden becomes another thing that needs fixing right when attention is already stretched thin. Buried clay pots don't eliminate work, but they remove fragility. They don't care about pressure. They don't need electricity. They don't rely on moving parts. Once buried, they sit there and respond only to the soil around them. When water is available, they store it. When the soil dries, they release it. When rain comes, they pause. That simplicity matters more than it used to. This isn't about preparing for disaster or rejecting modern tools. It's about reducing dependence on systems that demand constant input. A garden should make you more capable, not more tied to schedules and supplies. Clay pot irrigation won't solve every problem. It won't grow food without good soil. It won't replace attention entirely. But it does one thing very well. It puts water where plants can reach it and keeps it there with minimal loss. That's why it has lasted so long in so many places. Not because it's old, but because it fits how soil and roots actually work. Progress isn't always about adding complexity. Sometimes it's about removing points of failure. When the garden becomes calmer, so do you. And that's often the most practical result of all.